Hello. I don't even know what I'm going to call this video because I want to talk about a number of different issues that are all sort of interconnected, but I'm really not sure what I'm going to collectively name this video because there's so many things going on right now regarding race relations in this country. There's other things going on in the world, of course. There has been a serious clash um, between China and India. Apparently, 20 Indian troops have been killed in this border clash. Now, if it wasn't for um, what's being called the Statues Wars and the race relation situation on both sides of the Atlantic, I think that would be major, major news. Um, I mean, it's a real serious situation when Asia's two giants square off like that, and apparently it's the most serious clash in decades. Reportedly, 20 Indian troops have been killed. There's strong anti-Chinese feelings have risen in India. So I may make another video about that depending how things go. Um, and no doubt there'll be other videos that I want to upload related to this issue, but I'm just going to talk about various different subjects. So just bear with me. It's all interconnected to race relations in the current situation. Let me just say from the outset, I think there is a lot of emotional responses going on right now, a lot of manipulation, frankly, as to the situation that we are actually in as a country. Tonight I've been watching the film Made in Britain. Uh, it was a television play made in 1982, no copyright infringement intended. This is a film. It's an early performance by Tim Roth, who's a great actor. Among other roles, he's played Governor George Wallace. He was in the 1990 series Tales from the Crypt. Um, and it's based on a screenplay by Alan Clark. Um, but basically, it's about a young skinhead, um, 16-year-old. Tim Roth was 21 at the time, but superb performance. Very, very sinister character. Very gritty. It's worth checking out. Um, I've also been looking at old footage of the 2011 England riots, and I won't come back to that in a minute. But yesterday, the news caught my attention because as I was talking to my friend on the phone, I saw a local statue here in Sunderland come up on the screen. That caught my attention because the day before, I'd specifically went up to, if you know Sunderland, Building Hill overlooking Mowbray Park. It's a statue of General Henry Havelock. Now, Henry Havelock was a major general who played an important role in the Indian Mutiny of 1857, the Sepoy Rebellion, the First Indian War of Independence, whatever you want to call that conflict. He was a significant player in that, and he died during the Siege of Lucknow in 1857. So that statue commemorates him. He was born in Sunderland. Um, anyway, I went up there specifically to see if it had been targeted, because every historic statue had, and it hadn't. Next day, I see this report, and right enough, wishful thinking, it had been targeted. Big red letters, racist parasite were scrawled over the statue. And there were some little notes. Now, Sunderland City Council, I have to give them a credit, they immediately cleaned it up. Local Labour councillor, who I actually stood against when I stood for election over 10 years ago, um, both he and the Conservative councillor both denounced the vandalism. Sunderland City Council is going to do a partial review into statues in the city. I believe we have about four statues in Sunderland. One is to the football manager of Sunderland AFC, Bob Stokoe, who helped Sunderland win the FA Cup final against Leeds United in 1973. One is to the local MP, John Candlish. One is to this man, General Henry Havelock, and the other is to Jack Crawford, who was a sailor during the Battle of Camperdown in 1797 and who was sort of seen as a local hero because the expression "nail your colours to the mast," he famously raised the Union Jack during the Battle of Camperdown against the Dutch in that conflict, the War of the First Coalition. So they're the four statues I know of in Sunderland, and this one has been targeted. I can't think of any rationale why they would target Bob Stokoe. Um, John Candlish, he's a Victorian MP. You know, pretty much every Victorian is in their sights at the moment. And by their sights, I'm talking about the campaigners. Interestingly enough, there were several interviews, and the one guy that was defending it was a white guy. And what the local Conservative councillor pointed out was that many of the people signing the petition to have the statue brought down are probably not even from Sunderland. Now, the same councillor said that General Henry Havelock used brutal methods to put down the rebellion, as did the other generals. There's no doubt about it. The British did commit atrocities in India, and no doubt there were atrocities committed during that conflict. Um, there were, I believe, five princely states that backed the British side, um, and there was many civilian deaths in the consequential months from disease, from famine, and from other conditions. So it was a dark period of history. But what seems to be happening now is very, very spontaneous. And one question I have about all of this, and no one's has actually really brought this up that I can see, and it's this. If there is such contention about these historic figures, why is there not being significant sort of efforts to have these statues brought down before? The only one I can think of is Cecil Rhodes, because the Rhodes Must Fall campaign has been going on for a few years. Incidentally, Oxford University has just come out and actually said that black students who feel traumatized by the George Floyd situation can actually have their grades reviewed. So, in other words, if their grades weren't very good, they can actually have that reviewed on the grounds that they were traumatized over the George Floyd situation. So, let's just throw out academic fairness. You know, if you were troubled by what happened to George Floyd, what is it, 5,000 miles away, then you can, you're going to get better grades. Let's forget how well you've done in the actual exam or the thesis or whatever it is. You're going to get better grades because if we downgrade you, then we're not taking into account the obvious post-traumatic stress you receive from watching the news. It's clearly absurd. Um, like I said at the start of the video, I think there's an awful lot of manipulation going on here. What I mean by that is I think there's a lot of virtue signaling going on to Black Lives Matter. I saw a little photograph earlier in Mem. It was clearly from a right wing source. It showed Boris Johnson and Keir Starmer, and the caption was Leaders Lead, Cards Kneel. This was in a reference to the fact that Boris Johnson has not done that taking the knee gesture Keir Starmer has. Now, I think it's too early to judge Keir Starmer's record as Labour leader. He's done some things I approve of, some things I'm not so happy about. But this taking the kneel business, the problem with the way that is going is, I mean, we're seeing it across the board. We're seeing it from celebrities. We're seeing it now from the FA, from footballers. Um, Here's my question for police forces. Here's my question. What will be the consequence for those who choose not to take the knee? Not because they don't necessarily support Black Lives Matter, but because they just want to be neutral. I mean, take, for example, police officers. Are we now in a situation where if they choose not to take the knee, then they're going to be deemed as racist? They could potentially be targeted by rioters because they're not taking the knee, so they must be racist. What David Blunkett wrote in the Daily Mail about sending out the wrong message, I think he was right about that. Um, and he was cautious to say he didn't want to judge individual officers because obviously the issue of police brutality as a whole is a very central focus of the recent protests. I do think, I'm sympathetic to the Met, but I am tempted to say that Baz Javid, the Deputy Commissioner, his decision, he's the brother of the former Home Secretary and the former Chancellor, his decision to allow the protest to go ahead, I think that may have been a big mistake. We are, people seem to forget, in the middle of a pandemic. And just like the pandemic took away news from Brexit, now these racial tensions are taking away news from the pandemic. But the irony about this is, I go into a back and forth with a Nigerian acquaintance of mine. It was somewhat civil, but it was testy because she was taking issue with my criticism of Black Lives Matter, and she was basically being very negative, portraying the UK as a very racist country and trying to claim that Nigeria was very welcoming and tolerant. I've never been there. I can't say if it is or it isn't, but I was challenging some of the things she was suggesting. Um, with manipulation, I'll give an example of what I'm talking about with this. Some of the things that are held up as supposed racism are really, really not what should be regarded as hardcore racism or even solid racism. An example being, I've heard Black Lives Matter people say, every time they get rejected from a job interview, that's a microaggression or that's subtle racism. Now I've been rejected from many jobs, but that I say, oh, it's because I'm white. No, I think, well, maybe I just don't have the experience. And sure, it's frustrating, but that's the sort of manipulation that's going on. So I fundamentally have a problem with the message that Black Lives Matter is putting out. The message they're putting out is that there are rampaging racist American cops who are just killing black people left, right, and center for the hell of it. There is absolutely no question that there are many cases that do demand attention. For example, the killing of Breonna Taylor. Um, Certainly the killing of George Floyd. There is a lot of question marks over those sort of crimes. But a lot of what's happening in America in terms of the culture wars and identity politics is being brought over here. I think it's a mistake to say that Britain and America are just like and like when it comes to race relations. Britain has a long history of racial tensions. Um, so it's not that we are squeaky clean with this. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying, though, is that some of the identity politics that began in the United States are being exported now to the UK. I mean, the concept of white privilege is an American invention. That isn't something that came from the UK, and it's now being exported here. So that group, I think they call themselves Britain is not innocent. It's kind of a subsidiary or ally to Black Lives Matter. Their issue is Britain is not innocent. Well, we're not innocent. No country is. Um, But I think there is a lot of manipulation going on here for those who want to present Britain as some sort of racist hellhole. They would do well to look at how far we have come. I mean, in the 1950s and 60s, I would say, and well into later years, there was absolutely, there wasn't just like racism from racists, there was institutional racism. I mean, you look at those old news reports, the way they used to talk about black people was abhorrent. So I'm not in denial about that history. Um, but I'm going to say something here that will be risky, but I'm going to say it anyway. If there was a sort of white institutional racism at that time that was overbearing and very blatant in its racism, I would say in some ways it's went too far in the other direction. And this is why. We now have a situation where violent criminals who happen to be black are immediately held up to be innocent by Black Lives Matter. This is one of my fundamental issues with Black Lives Matter. They never ever bother to really, really consider the individual circumstances of someone's record, for example. Now, the 2011 England riots was all triggered by the death of a black man, Mark Duggan. Now, Mark Duggan was an armed criminal. Mark Duggan was not some innocent black man minding his own business who was, peacefully walking down the street. Then racist white cops just decided to kill him. This man was a violent, armed criminal. That's the fact. As a result of that, the violence kicked off, as it had done in London previously, like the Brixton riots, the Notting Hill riots, the Broadwater Farm riots. There's a long history of racial riots in London, um, and it kicked off. Then it spread to London, other London boroughs, and it started spreading around England. Specifically England, it didn't actually spread to Wales or Scotland or Northern Ireland, which is interesting, but it spread across English cities. In Birmingham, three young men were killed in a hit and run incident. And remarkably, the father of one of the victims showed incredible grace. He said he wasn't angry with the police, he wasn't angry with the government, he wasn't angry with anyone, and he prayed to Allah for their souls. Incredible grace that a man showed. Um, but looking back at that footage, I'm just disgusted that there was people at the time trying to condone it. One of the saddest things about those riots was an old family department store by the name of Reed's in, I think it was Tottenham, burned to the ground. It was an old Grade 1 listed building, I believe, burned to the ground. And the company had other branches, but that one was kind of their flagship building. Very, very sad. There were people burned from their homes. I will never ever accept the rationale that looting or vandalism or thuggery can be condoned because of some external grievance or some grievance that a movement pertains to be all about. So I will never accept the argument that we are angry about the way the police behave, so we're going to burn down this business. And I'm sick and tired of the left making excuses for that and trying to find some sort of rationale to defend it. Of course, there is deep underlying issues that absolutely can't be ignored. But I think when you have that sort of chaos, I mean, what was actually happening in those London riots is because the police were understaffed, there was a report from Elton in southwest London, where people were actually taking kind of, I don't want to say vigilantes, but they were basically patrolling the area themselves because they didn't believe the police would protect their businesses. And some of them were basically Millwall football casuals. I'm sure some of those guys did not have squeaky clean records themselves, but they were protecting their neighborhood. I'll never understand the rationale or logic of people who are angry with the police, so they burn down their own neighborhood. I've heard it argued, oh, this is just blind rage. Maybe it is. I believe there's a lot of opportunism as well. But, you know, we're never going to I've heard the Black Lives Matter slogan is no peace without justice, right? So that means holding the police to account. It means looking at reasons why, for example, more black and minority people have died proportionally from COVID. It means looking at why um, there's disproportionate issues affect young black men in this country, why there's problems with black on black crime, something that, by the way, Black Lives Matter has routinely kind of sidelined, even though it kills far more black people than police brutality. Um, but I think the media is there is no issue that it is more important for the media to get it right on than race relations. Because, take for example the recent unrest, there was obviously the far right hooligans who came down. I was disgusted by their behaviour, as any reasonable person would be, you know. Um, there was a small number of veterans who came with honest intentions to protect the statues, and they weren't causing trouble. But then they got kind of overshadowed by the ADL and Britain First lot, who came down to London basically to riot, to get boozed up, to attack the police, and to generally behave like hooligans. But if you look at the coverage, the narrative about the Black Lives Matter protests was it's mostly been peaceful and there were some troublemakers. I believe the condemnation of both sides needs to be unequivocal, and I don't believe one side should be condemned more than the other. Um, because people should not forget that in that first week, it was factions of Black Lives Matter that were attacking the police. And this wasn't a small thing. It keeps being dismissed as a few troublemakers. There was actually quite significant violence. Um, and now an interesting thing that's developed is the utterly pathetic white virtue signaler tendency. Imagine it was racist point on LBC or on his Facebook page updates where he said that we are now actually seeing a situation where some white leftists, are going so out of their way to virtue signal that they are actually coming out with racist attitudes towards black conservatives and minority conservatives, or at least those who don't endorse Black Lives Matter. There was one young black woman who actually said, I'm not going to hide behind a victimhood mentality. And some white virtue signaling clown actually tried to shame her, as he put it, for pandering to the right. So these people are so ideologically fixated on their cultural Marxist agenda. I don't want to sound like some alt-righter by saying that. There's no other way to put it. There really is no other way to put it. It's utterly pathetic how some of these white virtue signaling fools are actually going out of the way. Some of them purportedly have even worn blackface to empathise, which is crazy. It's just crazy. So I'm starting to see more minority conservative people speaking out against this because they don't want sort of attitude of the victimhood narrative to be representing them. I do not see what good is going to come from putting out nothing but negativity and cynicism, and everything is because of racism. And the media is not helping. There are too many segments of the media that are pandering to Black Lives Matter. They're not really doing their job as journalists and asking them tough questions. I think, and that's a problem because right now, Black Lives Matter are kind of being seen as just messengers, just, oh, well, there are these campaigners motivated by injustice. We need to just listen to them. We need to just pander to them. My attitude to Black Lives Matter is okay, let's listen to their concerns. Let's listen to what they're saying. Let's listen to what they are saying, well, demanding needs to be done. But it doesn't mean agree with everything they're saying. It doesn't mean absolutely giving them everything they want. For example, tearing down all statues. I think it's very possible to support the principle of Black Lives Matter as a principle whilst having problems with Black Lives Matter as a movement, in the same way that you can support gender egalitarianism whilst having a problem with some of the hypocrisies of third wave feminism. I detest this way that unless you really forcefully support a particular movement, then you're somehow an enemy of the movement. So if you're critical of Black Lives Matter as a movement, then somehow you're a racist who doesn't care about injustice against black people. But I do think that it's very dangerous how racism as a problem is held up as the core issue in every single case. So if a black man happens to die from a white police officer, it must be racism. Let's not bother looking into the background of the particular case. Let's just assume it's racism. And I think the likes of CNN, their coverage for the most part has been an utter disgrace because they haven't really looked into the complexities of these problems. All they have done, all they have done is pander to the narrative of Black Lives Matter. I'm just saddened by the events of the last few weeks because I don't know where this is heading. I do hope it's a temporary thing, but we're in June now. The lockdown continues. People are fed up with the lockdown. There may well be disorder on the streets, but any leader who cannot bring themselves to condemn looting and vandalism and thuggery, whoever is causing it, right? I've said this before. I don't care if you're black, you're Asian, you're white. I don't care if you're Black Lives Matter or EDL or Britain First or anyone else. If you are going out with the sole intention of throwing Molotov cocktails at the police, of looting premises, shops, then you lose any moral argument you might have had. Period. And there will be some on the left and so-called progressives who will look at those far-right hooligans, and that's what I call them, that's what they are, and use that as a way to kind of take attention away from the fact there were Black Lives Matter hooligans as well. It's true that there were a lot of peaceful demonstrators. I'm not going to deny that. There was. But we're not talking about a couple of individuals who caused trouble in the days leading up to. I mean, the incident where someone took the British flag and burned it at the cenotaph was an inflammatory act. Apparently, there's a new proposal to sentence people to 10 years for desecrating war memorials. I actually think that's too harsh. I think the focus should be on. I personally would like to see harsh penalty for looting and for certainly for thuggery. The thing about war memorials, certainly I think there should be a penalty. I think it's very inflammatory and grossly disrespectful. But I think the where the focus of harsh penalty should be is on looting and on destruction of people's livelihoods. You know, desecrating a war memorial is definitely hurtful to people whose family have served in the armed forces. I do think there should be a punishment. I don't think 10 years though. I think that's excessive. I think that's just a distraction. A bit like, you know, some of the penalties handed out during the England riots. Whilst I support them in principle, I think that with sentencing, it needs to be focused on the worst crimes, on the destructive crimes. That is to say, not just, I wouldn't put the priority on vandalism. I would put the priority on looting and on destroying people's businesses and homes. I think arson should get a very, very harsh penalty, years, because it's not just destroying someone's house, it's actually putting someone's life in danger. We know that for a fact. So I hope the worst is over, but I feel that race relations have been set back in this country. You know, all of this unrest, what's Black Lives Matter achieved? They think they've opened up a debate about our imperial past. What I would respond to that is Britain's not China. You know, we already are a country where there is actually candid discussion about anything, right? So this idea that, you know, Black Lives Matter had this duty to open our eyes to our racist past is a complete nonsense. You could go into any library, you could take university courses, you could look at countless films, documentaries, books. Um, I just do not accept this idea that the British people are somehow just we have blinkers up to our past and it's just all, you know, it's the duty of Black Lives Matter to educate us. I think we are an open society. That's not to say there aren't apologists. It's not to say that there isn't racism. But, you know, things aren't going to change if you have a situation, for example, where there is mass condemnation of white racism and white nationalists, fine. But then black racists and Asian racists get a free pass. And that's an area where I think the media has a lot to answer for because they will not hold black racists and Asian racists to account. They will not put the same sort of scrutiny on them as they will on white racists. Now, to be clear here, I've no problem with white racists getting scrutiny. I've come across them. I've been in direct, um, conflict with them online and, well, yeah, online. So I know the ugly ideology that they come out with, and it disgusts me. You know, when I see things like the white patriots will defend their, it's just some of the stuff they come out with is toxic. But I've also seen overtly racist opinions from black and Asian columnists that gets a free pass. An example being of Hirsch. The sort of thing she has come out with, no white person would get away with. Or if they were making those sort of opinions, they would be immediately deemed to be a far right racist. But she gets away with it because she's a minority woman of color who's commenting on the issues. If as a society we're to say that we are not tolerating racism, that must apply across the board. It must, because the double standards will absolutely infuriate people. It will infuriate moderate people. So someone like me who has no affiliation with those far right neo-Nazi types, the double standards infuriate me. Anyway, I've run out of 30 minutes. I better round this up, but there's a lot to cover. And no doubt I'll make more videos as time goes on, seeing how things develop.